Welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing a deep dive into the detailed biography of someone you absolutely know by name, Mother Teresa. We're going to objectively break down the nuanced and honestly deeply debated legacy of one of modern history's most recognizable figures. We'll look closely at the extraordinary good she celebrated for and, the fierce criticisms that followed her everywhere.
But before we get into her monumental achievements or those strident criticisms, we really have to ask how history actually reconciles the two extreme sides of her public image. For decades, right, her name has literally been synonymous with ultimate selflessness, yet her legacy is totally layered with intense scrutiny. So how do we understand a figure who won the Nobel Peace Prize, but also faced severe pushback over the conditions of her clinics and her super rigid stances on social policies? To figure that out, here's our roadmap. 1. From Skopje to India. 2. A mission for the poor. 3. Stances on social issues. 4. Facing the critics. And 5. The path to sainthood.
All right, part 1. From Skopje to India, the origins of a mission.
Long before she became a global icon recognized in literally every corner of the world, her worldview was taking shape. She was born in Skopje, Macedonia, and her perspective definitely wasn't formed in a vacuum. It was heavily influenced by the complex historical background of the region. Things like the ethnic conflicts of the Albanians and the deep East-West religious tensions of that era. In the middle of all this turbulence, she got incredibly strong moral guidance from her mother, Drona, who totally instilled in her this profound dedication to loving your neighbor.
Then, her youth took a massive, pivotal turn following the profound loss of her father. This death, coupled with those regional conflicts that were quite literally tearing families apart with state walls, deeply, deeply impacted her. So, inspired by her mother's teachings and drawn to the spirit of St. Francis of Assisi, she eventually made the monumental decision to leave home. She departed for India with the Jesuits to actually begin what would become her life's work.
Which brings us to part 2, a mission for the poor, serving the destitute.
Her arrival in India kicked off a mission that would eventually capture the entire world's attention. She championed this philosophy of really radical, localized empathy. Actually, during a visit to the University of Scranton, she spoke to thousands of students and challenged them to just look around their own communities. She told them they could find Christ in the guise of distress right in their own neighborhoods. So the key takeaway here is that her message wasn't just about sending aid across the globe. It was this universal call to, as she put it, do small things with great love, whether you're standing in India or Pennsylvania. In that relentless dedication to the destitute brought her massive global recognition. The list of accolades is wild. She received India's Padma Shri, the first ever Pope John XXIII Peace Prize, the Templeton Prize beating out thousands of nominees, and of course, the 1979 Nobel Peace Prize. But she didn't just collect trophies to put on a shelf. In many cases, these awards came with some pretty substantial cash prizes. To put in perspective, the roughly $17,000 from the Pope, she directed that straight into building a leper colony on land donated by the Indian government. Other funds went directly to purchasing homes for children. She always accepted these honors in the name of the world's poor. Moving to part 3, stances on social issues. Holy family planning. Now, as her fame and her resources skyrocketed, we enter a much more complex chapter of her bio. We have to look at her rigid application of church doctrine to some extremely complex social crises. Her public life was, frankly, defined by a pretty stark contrast. On one hand, you have this universal praise for her compassion, but on the other, she started facing increasingly strident detractors. As millions in donations poured in, she caught serious fire for accepting contributions from, questionable donors. Plus, in a country grappling with massive population growth and crushing poverty, she drew intense criticism for her strict, absolute opposition to abortion and sterilization, which, by the way, were practices the Indian government was actively advocating at the time to curb those escalating birth rates. So, to counter those soaring birth rates without violating Catholic doctrine, she established what the Missionaries of Charity called Holy Family Planning. It was a three-pronged approach. First, she actively combated abortion clinics by sending word to hospitals and police stations that her sisters would take in literally any unwanted child. Second, she promoted adoption as the main alternative. And third, she set up family planning centers to teach young married couples the rhythm method and abstinence, because according to the church, that was the only sanctioned family planning practice. But the complexity, and honestly sometimes the major disconnect, of teaching these methods to the extremely poor is highlighted by a really striking anecdote from her biography. A local woman who was desperately hoping to avoid another pregnancy was instructed in the rhythm method at one of these centers. She was given a string of colored beads to help track her ovulation. Well, several months later, she returns to the center visibly pregnant. When the sisters asked what happened, she explained that she had taken those beads, hung them around a statue of the Hindu goddess Kali, and just forgot about them. She genuinely couldn't understand why the method hadn't worked. It's a vivid example of how rigid doctrinal solutions could totally clash with the everyday realities of the people she was trying to help.
Okay, part 4. Facing the critics. The untouchable legacy questioned. Beyond just social policy, the actual day-to-day operational conditions of her hospices drew some really fierce direct fire. 2 of her loudest critics were actually called upon by the Vatican to give evidence against her canonization. We're talking about the famous film host and writer Christopher Hitchens, who co-wrote the documentary Hell's Angel, and Indian doctor Arup Chatterjee, who authored Mother Teresa, The Untold Story. Both of these men forcefully highlighted what they described as horribly unsanitary conditions in her houses for the dying. They pointed out a severe lack of proper medical care, totally inadequate pain relief, and basically argued that her glorification of poverty was resulting in a lot of completely unnecessary suffering. Well, in response to these intense, very public attacks, Vatican officials totally stepped in to defend her. Father Peter Gumpel, an official at the Congregation for the Cause of Saints, argued that these critics were completely missing the point. He stated that her specific charism, her divinely conferred gift, was never to build or run modern state-of-the-art hospitals. The church already had plenty of people doing that. Her mission, he argued, was to face desperate conditions and rescue those who were given absolutely zero chance of survival, people who otherwise would have literally died alone on the streets. For the Vatican, these criticisms just didn't dim her saintly character one bit. Finally, part 5, the path to sainthood, legacy reconciled. So, despite the enduring controversies and the very vocal detractors, the institutional church moved right ahead to cement her legacy on a global scale. Following her death in 1997, her journey to officially becoming a saint was remarkably, almost unprecedentedly fast. By 2003, Pope John Paul II beatified her. Now, for millions of her admirers, this was just a formality. To them, she was already a saint. And her institutional footprint only kept growing. In September 2017, she was officially named a co-patron of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Calcutta, standing right alongside St. Francis Xavier. So, as we wrap up this explainer on her life, and having looked at both the immense scale of her global accolades and the really stark realities pointed out by her critics, we're left with a deeply profound question. Think about this. Does true humanitarianism require modern medical perfection and strict ethical funding? Or is there an overriding saintliness simply in the willingness to embrace the absolute poorest of the poor right when the rest of the world has completely looked away? It's a complex question, and it pretty much ensures Mother Teresa's legacy is going to be debated for generations to come. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.